All right, well, I see people are still getting food, but the noise just went down, so I'm gonna assume we're ready, because I'm doing the introductions. Normally, Dr. Erin Payton would be thrilled to be introducing Abhishek, but she's teaching right now, so I said that I would take the honor. So Dr. Abhishek Bhati recently made tenure and is now an associate professor of political science and the director of the Asian Studies program at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. His research and teaching focus on nonprofit and civil society, international development, and global politics. He's very well known in nonprofit studies for his pre-tenure research on decolonizing philanthropy and online giving, and has won several awards for that work, including the RGK Arnova President's Award and the Association of Fundraising Professionals Fundraising Research Award. His research paper does implicit color bias reduced giving, learnings from fundraising survey using an implicit association test, won the Best Paper Award in Voluntas in 2020. He has also co-authored with some of our very own OSU faculty and students, including Aaron Beaton and Yinlin Ma. And today, Dr. Bhati is going to be presenting emergent work examining the effects of fundraising restrictions on civil society in India. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bhati.
Or did you check back if you'd like to be interrupted or?
Oh, sorry.
Would you like to be interrupted or would you like?
Oh,
to
yeah,
question?
so, yeah, if there is something which, if I made a mistake or if there is anything which, you think you probably need more clarification, please stop me, no problem. Sometimes I might, I'll just say, I might be able to answer that question in my presentation. So I'm just really looking forward for a discussion. This is something which I'm working on recently. Thank you, Megan, for introducing me. Thank you for Al for organizing me a bunch of emails. You were diligent, like sending me emails. That's good. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. First time in Columbus, never been there, and I'm very impressed. I'm on the other part of the stage. So the work I want to talk about is something I've been thinking about doing for a long time. I think probably 7 or 8 years. I just was waiting for tenure to get those papers out, and now that they have, I'm thinking about this visiting. So I'm very excited to present here. This is still work in progress, so your feedback highly appreciated, including that this is the stupidest thing you're talking about. Do it again. Happy to do it. The title is Civil Society at Risk, Analysis of Increasing Administrative and Financial Restrictions from Civil Society and Nonprofit Organizations. The work essentially could be applied to any developing country in Latin America or even Asia, but I want to specifically focus on India. And there's a reason why I want to do it. My background is in India. I was born and raised in India. I came to the US in 2013, so it's been 10 years in the US. But I go back to my time there, and I feel that good research needs solid background in that topic. And it's really, so I think I could speak to what I'm presenting because I've seen that, I care about that, I've worked in the sector for a long time. So I do have a bachelor's in economics, my master's in social entrepreneurship from College of Social Sciences, and there's a reason why I'm mentioning this. I'll get into the presentation why. Also, I've worked in national conference and so think tank. So the professor, as Megan said, thank you for that. And I'm in the direct patient program. A lot of admin work which I didn't know that will come my way. Again, teaching interest in nonprofit management, public administration, and also international. And I wanted to bring some of the past research, not to show that I've been busy. I've been really busy in publishing in different areas, but I was hoping if there was some discussion about some of the work I have done in the past, happy to take those questions. If you're working on those ideas, thinking about collaborations or getting some insights. So, but probably my work can be classified into 3 buckets: social equity and representation, more around representation of images around poverty, on fundraising and what it means to be represented from the other side, not from the donor side, but the beneficiary side of things. Talking about social equity from a context of post-colonial theory, which is that not everyone in Asia is the same. There's a gender bias to it, there is a color bias to it, there is a class bias to it, there's education bias to it, there's all kinds of biases which we do not talk about. So we think of one identity as person of color, but it's far more complicated than that, and there are privileges and not so privileges in that identity. And what we can think about this in public administration, especially when we're living in a more complicated world in which the delivery of the goods will be at the level to meet the citizens level, right? And then social media and fundraising work really got a lot of attention. especially about online giving. Actually just working on another paper, which is under review, which focus on what kind of messages help us to get more money, right? So not all messages are the same. So what is a different kind of messages? Do we talk about need more? Should we talk about ambition more? Should we actually have a cute puppy photograph to get more donations? What it is that gets us more donations? That's something which is working for the summer. And something which I'm representing, so a lot with COVID, I worked with Aaron on this project. I'm non-profit, I think we can still do more. But COVID had been, I think, blessing in disguise, but it has such a life-changing experience for all of us. And we're just still understanding how this has affected us. So that has kind of really shifted my understanding about civil society, and something which I'm going to focus today on is the impact of national relief funds on civil freedom in South Asia. National relief funds are funds which government have control on. So these are money which the government is raising to tackle poverty, tackle a disaster, floods or whatever. The government controls that money, and then they may decide to spend the money themselves or may decide to give the money to the nonprofits, but they control that money. And how does that affect civil society? Is that interpretation? And also growing financial restrictions on civil society, especially foreign donation. So that's something which I would work today. Any questions? I'll be a good professor right now. No questions. All right, perfect. Let me just stick to it. If we look at this map, this shows about the democracy, and it's kind of alarming if you look at it. Democracies are declining in the world. As we speak. So the left graph that looks at just the countries, and this is number of countries, but overall we see there's steep decline, and not just in the developing countries, but also in the developed countries of the Western countries, right? So there's a decline in democracy around the world. But if we control it by population, so we do the weighted average of population, things even look much more deeper, right? So there is a far more stronger decline in developing countries where most people live in Asia. Right. So there is an overall, as we speak, we talk about modernity and stuff. We thought we made headways, but there is a decline in democracy around the world. We also see that the decline is not the same between the countries, right? So there are some liberal countries, liberal democracies that decline in these. And then there is electoral autocracy, which declines more, and then there's the close autocracy, right? So this doesn't show, but overall, if we wait for average, 60%, 68% of population in the world is living in less democratic rules now than they were living 10 years ago, right? So it's a major chunk of population. They're all these countries exist in Asia and in other places on Latin America. And if we look at the countries which have made advances, Tunisia is an example, some success, Romania, but the countries which are going down, the decliners, are some of a major concern, right? If you're doing well in democracy, that's good, everyone has to say, but what is going on to some of the decliners and why is that happening? And what really does get my attention is India. In last 10 years, declined from 0.55 to 0.35. So the decline is really steep in India. Made a lot of progress with democracy. It's not an old country. We got independence 75 years ago. Most populated country in the world, and the decline is something which is alarming. So we're going to talk about the decline and the role of civil society in that context. And if we look at decline in different senses, the picture starts to get a little bit more clear. For instance, free and fair elections are fairly stable. In India, over a period of time, there is a decline, but not great. The fear is that, well, they are stable right now because the current party is in the power. What if there's a change in the party, and what if that changes the things, right? So then that's really bad, right? Even the most stable free and fair elections starts to get shaken, and that's one of the fears of political scientists. But if you look at CSO repression, that is pretty alarming, right? So it has been fairly stable for a long time, and now the curve is going down. And if we look at even, and before I get to India, I just also wanted to have some humility. Even US is declining. So we cannot just raise pointing at other countries when we ourselves have some problems. So in the last 10 years, there's 11-point decline in the economic space as well. So this is not just the other problem, this is happening globally, is what I was trying to say. One of the major declines in India is among the CSO repression. Anecdotally, when I talk to some of my friends who work in civil society, there is an uncomfort about talking about the issues that they are facing. There is a little bit fear of what will happen. So different kind of fears, but it's just not an academic discussion right now. We could see it on the ground that this is happening. There is overall fear around freedom. There's overall fear about life. There's overall fear about the work nonprofits are doing, and there's a sense that this is going down the hill pretty fast. And what should make all of us concerned, this is the most populated country on the world. So let's kind of look at a little bit of the footprint in India. India has a fairly stable and has a long history of civil society. There are roughly 10 million civil societies in India. So there are 10 million worldwide and 3 million registered NGOs or civil society, nonprofits in India. I'm just using the word NGO and nonprofit here, not in each other, which is not a control language. Just to give a frame of reference, there are one nonprofit for every 400 citizens. And it's more the number of law enforcement. That's 1 to 600. So it is really present. And again, as you know, if you work in this field, these are registered organizations. There are a bunch of organizations which are not registered. So there is a wide presence. Number of organizations also means employment. Number of organizations also means contribution to the economy. Just the numbers. It has a strong role in the human resource side of things and also in the economic side of things, which play around the world. And it has a strong tradition of voluntary organization. Similar to other countries, religion plays a significant role there. The Brahma Samaj established in 1828, Ramakrishna Mission 1897, and I bring this up is almost double the length of the independence of the country. India got independence in 1947, 75th year of independence a few years ago. But the history exists. That it is a well-known profession, reputed profession. People hear about it, have representation from different sectors in the society. And also, the first school of social work was in 1936, where I went. So I just brought that out. So it has a so really stable environment of work in the society. If you look at money, there's a decent amount of resources which get generated, and I want to focus on the foreign side of things. But there is a growing middle class, and then there is also a growing industries which are catering to that growing population, right? So there is a decent amount of corporate giving which occurs. This is estimated 2015 to 2018, about $2.9 billion, which are generated through corporate social responsibilities, which is there's a law in India in which you have to give 2% of your profit if you're a corporation to the civil society sector. So there is a good amount of money which gets generated there. There is also a major chunk of revenue or funding comes from foreign donations, which is mostly Europe, but still presence of the US, right? There is a long history of giving from Europe to India, but US also has been giving. It has been somewhat steady, but been declining, and then there is also the government grant which is coming. There is through government is helping to establish a small local hospital, a school, or employment generation, a skill set based kind of stuff. So government is doing more contracting to the civil society, not to the level of the US, but still there's some amount of funding which goes to from the government to the civil society. So overall, like what's going on? So we see that overall since the 1980s, the civil society has been playing a very important role into the geopolitical environment. It's not just about do-gooders doing good, but also advocacy, environmental laws, policy work, is going on. So from human rights to poverty alleviation to welfare, all it's just not like an arm of the government board, but more like we will also tell you what to do to make better policies, so we are able to pull people out of poverty and reduce some of the social issues. And then also we see that since the economies are getting more collaborated with international trade seems to be constant despite of COVID or what, that as countries integrate with the global economy, they try to also have relationship of civil society as well. So there is top-down approach. The bottom-up approach is also like, I want to live in a fair society because I can see it on TV that particular society which is next door is free. I can see my friends who are on social media that they live in a fair society. So there is also, because of globalization, more connection about how we should live our lives, the shared Western values, so-called, you can say, right? We should be able to strive, education for boys and girls and stuff like that. So there is also that growing demand to kind of get integrated and fight some of those ills of the society. And what that does is that you cannot have two strong actors in the room, right? If civil society work has become more political and also especially in the policy realm, what it also does is decline the state power. And states do what is being told what to do and consult the civil society. So there has been that concern as well. And then response to that concern is states are coming up with laws which want to restrict the freedom of the civil society. So the states do want the civil society to operate, but at their own terms, right? The civil society should not be telling them how to make policies or what kind of policies to open the bodies of do the work and just, to focus on that. And since the 1960s, there has been a drastic, but it took a turn up since 2000 laws to restrict the freedom, right? What we call is that funding restrictions and administrative laws. I will go a little bit more in detail, but there are some rules around, for instance, you have to get approval if you have a foreign donation coming, even if it's for $1, you have to get a particular form from the government for which you have to get 15 signatures, which is going to take you 3 months, so it will push you down and you will not get that funding, right? So, or you have to every 3 months put a statement online. It has to be statement on the your website, and these are smaller organizations operating do not have the capacity to put the stuff out there, otherwise you will lose your license. So there is this kind of really work created so that you do not focus on your mission, right? So that administrative burden is done, and it becomes a headache when you have to run around the bureaucracy, which seems to not like you, but actually see you as an enemy to get the approval from. And then there is also restriction on the foreign funding. We'll talk that a little bit more today. But overall, there is an increase. And what COVID did was, and though we're still seeing the research to come out of it, was give now government away to actually curtail the freedom more openly. For instance, one of the basic rights is freedom of assembly, but you cannot do without permissions, right? And then when you're seen as an adversary or you're seen as a foreign element which is getting donations from other places, now you are actually through the government. Government is already in a vulnerable position because of COVID. So we will not give you, right? So basic rights of people are getting affected there. And then also it's entwined with the tendencies to be authoritative, right? Now I can use COVID as a way to say, well, you're irresponsible if you want to protest. And hence that kind of gives me a strong arm approach to it, like no protest anymore. So we get this sorted out. And then there were also barriers in funding, especially with the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, about who you get donation from, where will this money be used. So you have to tell the government beforehand all of these information to really do any organizing, right? Or any focus on the mission. So there is like several layers to which the control happened. And we see there is more crackdown in Myanmar, authoritative repression in Thailand, in case and we will talk about it. So it's not that the COVID increased the restrictions on the civil society, but it definitely gives them more tools to government to operate. But this has been happening for a while. So what are some of the ways government controls the civil society? And I'm going to focus on two approaches. One is restriction on the foreign funding through laws, administrative laws. And the second is shifting funds to the government side. So I'll talk a little bit about both of these issues. So those, I know there's a lot of text. Those of you who do not know FCRA, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, if you work in India, and if you work in civil society, you know this. It's just everyone is talking about this. Is something which has affected every organization. The law was started in 1976, had a history with the political party funding, which was the idea that the foreign government will fund political parties, and then those political parties will get a lot of money, and then those political parties will spend money and they will win. So essentially, it's a way in which governments of other countries are using the laws as civil society as a tool to get political advantage. So that was the rationale of having that law. It was introduced in 1976, focused on political elections and not some political party getting too much money. And it was seen as a foreign hand, foreign interference in our elections, that kind of stuff. It was not really used much till 2010. You know, here and there a little bit, but nothing to this level what is being used now. The law was amended in 2010. In which any foreign funding you have to, if you get even $1 from any international donor, which is non-existent in the US, so non-Indian donor gives any money to you, you have to get an approval from the government to take that position. That was the first time the law was amended to that level. And it was mostly in response to the funding against the nuclear plant, which was coming in one of the southern states, like Tamil Nadu, which was seen again as so the politics behind it was the nuclear reactor was coming from Russia. And the thought was the Europe and the US organizations are trying to protest about this nuclear reactor so that either India buys the nuclear reactor from Europe or US, or they do not have nuclear energy. So the whole narrative was that the Western countries do not want India to be self-reliant on energy, right? So we need energy, we need to have nuclear reactors fairly safe. And guess when Fukushima was happening at the same time? So 2010, Fukushima nuclear reactor happens in Japan. So people were protesting about safety. And again, it's a highly populated area next to the ocean. But it was seen as like interference into the affairs of the government, and the money was at that time thought to be channeled through civil society to protest about India as becoming a big power, right? Which still resonates today. Then 2015, the law was again amended, and in this case, heavy hitters organization lose their license. So starting with Ford Foundation, which has a strong presence in India, Greenpeace, and now human rights advocacy. So if you work in an area which the government doesn't like, that is environment, that could be human rights, that could be clean energy, I will just take your license away from you, and then I will ask you to come and we will negotiate on what you can or cannot do as a civil society, right? And then the other level, and so, you know, it was a lot in news that covered it, that organization which was founded by Mother Teresa lost its license, right? Mission Charities, which is doing great work in one of the eastern states, lost the license. So again, the law was further amended in 2020, even more restrictive this time. It was like, of all the money you will get, and this is a big country, we're talking about billions of dollars, have to come to one bank account in India, and you have to take 5 permissions, and you cannot spend more than 20% in that administrative expense. So you cannot pay people salaries high and all this stuff. So like administrative expense, you know, we see the parallel of it in the US. You do not want to pay too much money for fundraising expenses, but you should pay people salaries. You should be able to strengthen the operation. So essentially, like stifling the growth of those organizations, right? And there were some others.
Just really quickly, what are the biggest differences between what an unlicensed NGO can do in India versus a licensed NGO? What does the government like licensure like add to their abilities?
So tax benefits. So you know, filing of you get tax benefits if you give donations similar to the US. But in the case of the foreign contribution, they'll seize your office, like they will come and lock the office down, and even there are criminal proceedings against this ED, like who's running the organization or the financial head. So this is a crime. So if and it's very heavily monitored. So if you're getting any funding donations and you do not get the license, you're going to prison. So there are like serious consequences of not abiding the laws. And people are being, I can share the cases, right, in which the enforcement directorate, which is the local law enforcement agency, can come and ask for you for showing us the documents. Though you have complied, you have license, but they can show up at the door and ask you for documents because they just feel like they can do it. So there's a continuous harassment and also corruption because of it, right? There's too much interference of the state and country. So overall, what we see this going back is kind of really, in other words of this is, if I want to control the civil society, like I want to hit the value of the piece, which is the funding. Nonprofits cannot generate the revenues; they are dependent on the government or foreign on the corporate funding, which I will talk about a little bit in detail. So if I control the money, I control the organization. As simple as that. So I control all the money, I keep it in a centralized account, so I have this organization under control. And I do so by creating this facade that you can get the license, but you have to do additional paperwork. If paperwork is expensive, that administrative burden is now on these smaller organizations to do it, right? There's the feeling that this is on. You could do it, but who has the capacity at the time to do it, right? So also, this is a very quick, we're talking about fairly big sum of money. In 2018, it was $2.2 billion, which is coming in. And there is about 23 organizations which are operating now, and the number has been decreasing, and the most of the money goes into the southern part of the state. And most of the money comes from institutional donors, which is big foundations or other corporations. 10% of the money also comes from individual donors. And this is some of the empirical work I'm working on. For instance, identifying which countries is the money coming to and what causes and why. Also looking at what type of organizations are funding what type of other organizations. So is there some institutional understanding? Is the trade a reason for doing so? Is it the diaspora and stuff like that? So that's also the work I'm doing with my colleague Jeremy there. So also I have to say, and I will not be, I'm not presenting the empirical, but happy to talk about the empirical work. One of the things which really excited us about this project was back in 2016, the government promise of accountability. That was one of the big promises they were making. And in this process, they dumped a lot of data online of their work. So there was data of individual level transactions of money of all the money coming into US, into India from different countries, right? So there is year was head of the donor, name of the donor, address, and the amount from 2009 till 2019. When they do not do it anymore. So data is not available after 2009. Actually, they have destroyed the data. We have the data, we're just trying to save the data here, but because there was too much transparency. People are asking too many questions, and the government obviously was right. So that the promise of transparency has also disappeared. So the data is only available to 2019. It would be good to see what the data was coming from 2020, but the data is there. But this is to read the data, looking at organizations here, donation type and stuff. So there is a lot of stuff which could be done here related to data and what types of donors, what are the motivation of them to give money. That's some more incredible work I'm doing. Happy to discuss that. Please learn this, but I will not be focusing on that part here. The second thing which I will focus more on, so we talked about the restrictions on the foreign funding, kind of assembly, just attacking the value of these here. The other issue which also the government is doing is actually taking the money which is there and keeping it themselves, right? Which is what we call shifting funding to the government coffers, right? Through the national funds. I'll give an example. And this really started in the COVID time. These funds used to exist, but they took another phenomenal shape in the COVID. So what was going on is like as COVID is happening, and of course Asia is densely populated, so the effects of COVID are hard. and also the countries have less resources to give. So the government stepped up and said, if you give us money, we will take care of this problem and we will do it more centralized, right? So these organizations do not have enough resources to do math, they do not have resources to have hospitals, all the stuff. So what was going on was, and we look at 6 countries in Asia, but I just want to show India and Pakistan here. But was the message was sent out to all the commissions around the world, Indian Commission or Pakistani Commission in this case, is that give us the money and we will give you money, right? And for an average donor, it's hard to find an organization who to give if my family is not getting affected, right? I'd rather give it to a centralized resource, knowing the government will do it, and they'll take care of the problem because I want to help the country, especially from the diaspora. So what was done is there's a political act, the Prime Minister of India and Pakistan there, using their position as a way to fundraise, right? And using the machinery, the whole administrative state, right? So there's every country has a high commission, which is fairly established. They are in contact with their citizens. I'm just directly reaching out to the citizens saying, if you want to help, this is the right way to do it. And then, especially the Prime Minister CARES Act, which is Citizen Assistance Relief and Emergency Situation, was established in 2020. It was established as a charitable trust, but no information about where will the money be used was given, who are the board of the members. And this is kind of paradox when they're asking, even if you get $1 of donation, you'll tell us everything, right? But the government who's doing it is not telling it to us, right? So that's like the kind of paradox operating there. Within the year, generated $1 billion, really, really fast, right? And 42% of this generation was happening to the public sector, right? Which is essentially the corporate and the public sector is here, right? So this is through so from people who are working in public sector are like giving 2 days of this salaries, okay? Corporations are in a way twisted to give it to the fund, to the National Relief Fund because you want to be in good relationship with the government, especially if you operate in India, right? And then it was able to, so amount of money which is generating about $2.3 billion a year, you are able to generate in a few months about $1 billion, right? And then so of course there is no reporting whatsoever what the money was used. Half the 1/3 of the money has never been used, it's still sitting there. A lot of money came to the corporate responsibility. And then so there was this concern that it's another way in which the money which would have come to the civil society, either through foreign donations or either through the corporations and public sector, is diverted into this one fund in which the money is sitting and controlled by the government agency, right? That was the larger concerns there. And then obviously there's a centralization of that fund, right? Which means there's 0 to minimal inputs into where the money should be used. And also 0 to input, we do know that political actors work in their own interest, especially to get the political mileage. So the money which would go to people has also been politicized in the sense. Now there is, say, hospital setup, and there's a giant picture of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister actually did set up, but actually it was a donation of individuals from the corporations and from the public sector, right? So it used that. Also, you want to think about your voter base, where you want to spend money where you know you're getting the votes. Lack of transparency about it, corruption is another. So you have centralized, the money is going up to the machinery, how much it actually reaches people. Not much, and especially in the COVID time, you cannot protest, you cannot talk. And again, if you are talking about these, you're kind of risking people's health because you're reducing the speed of which this work is being done. Not much spending the funds or spending the funds for the liking of what I think is important. And then especially with the political matter. So the quick takeaway, and I think I will end it here for some discussions, happy to have discussions. But so we do see see decline in the democracy. Developing countries more so than the developed countries. We are not yet to see what is the effect of COVID on all of this. And then, but yes, the majority of the world is living in less democratic spaces than they were intended. years ago. And then the repression of the civil society is the number one key to control the democracy, right? So I control the dissent, I control the protest, I control where the money, and I have a control on what's going on politically. And then on the top of it, too much administrative burden on organizations which can operate, which will help the larger organizations, but actually really step with the smaller organizations, which are working grassroots, who don't have the mission to do that type of work. And also leading to more centralization of the money and pooling the resources of profits rather than money being diverted to all the nonprofits. So on that note, I'll stop here, but questions, continue discussions.
Open it up for questions.
I have two questions. Thank you, Director. My first question is, the case in India you talked about is similar to the case in China, and I don't think it would make much of a difference if it's India and China on the other side. And my question is, when we talk about civil society, we can talk about it as a whole, and we can also talk about it in terms of different policy areas. So I'm wondering whether your research touches upon the variations in the civil society in terms of different policy areas. Like in China, I just checked. I'm not a nonprofit scholar. I just checked. There are over 1,000 environmental NGOs in China, but I didn't find a single one related to liberal democracy. Maybe they have a different name, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So there seems to be a huge variation in the civil society in even some different policy areas. So this is my first question: whether your research touches upon the variations. And my second question is related to my own research. One of your research questions is about the network. I'm doing network analysis. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So, sure. So thank you. And I totally agree with you. You can play this playbook to any country, and it will make sense. Some more than others. I am interested in going back to see which are the organizations which license has been canceled, and how many of them license has been reinstated, and did they change their mission based on the reinstatement, right? So overall, empirically, just we're talking about journalistic writing, and there's very less written on this topic for different reasons, right? It's so politicized, people are not that comfortable talking about it and stuff. But if you are an environmental organization, you probably will be into a lot of problems. So you will operate your work, but not say it that way, right? That's another part of the problem, right? If you are an advocacy-based organization, and we see the advocacy funding going down in the US as well, despite all Black Lives Matter and all that stuff, but the organizations are not getting the money, just talk. The similar, if you are a human rights advocacy organization, you are far more under scrutiny than you would otherwise. If your work anyway touches the political realm, that could be asking people to go and vote. And voting is mandatory in India. You have to vote, like in the sense you don't have to register to vote. Just can show up on that day with the ID and you can vote. You will be in trouble, right? So there is. I know that if I'm operating a nonprofit, there are some areas which I can operate to and do work. So government is not saying all the civil society shut their shop, right? Government is doing, do our work for us, but do not talk anything about us. Right? So I'm just using you as a vehicle to increase, do social welfare, no problem. If you want to give free food to people, do it, right? In the time of COVID, the organization individuals giving and cooking and giving to people, that's no problem. But if you talk about rights, if you talk about larger issues which the government is not too keen on, they have the policy agenda, especially economic, that I'm not going to. And I see that parallel with China as well. And China's playbook is what India is going to. Right? Yeah. So with the about the data part of things, so there is a lot of data and there is a lot of unstructured data. So first thing was that we will like find these addresses, like, change the addresses based on there. So we did a lot of like data mining and stuff like that, made it more coincidental area. Then we merged with several other, what is the trade partner of India to those countries around? What is the population of diaspora there? What is the composition of so the unit of analysis, the level of country. And then, so our first level of analysis, which are the predictors to give more money? What reasons, why people give, either individual donors or institutional donors, why are they giving money? We have not looked at the institutional donors as of now, but that would be another level of analysis, like why are these organizations partnering and which organizations are they partnering? The other interesting analysis could be is, if I'm saying, if I'm from Ohio and my family is from Delhi, and do I give money to Delhi or do I give money to a cause? Right? So it seems like the money is still regionally focused. Geographic is the determining portion, right? Then the need, because need is, but we see that in the US, the need is not where the nonprofits are, not where the money is. So what are some other predictors? Why is money going to the South more than to other places? So we bring that institutional analysis also. So donors may be more motivated by giving the identity, but institutional donors are more strategic. Is that true or not?
So the network is mainly about the donation network.
Yeah, donation network. Keeping GDP of the country, keeping the population of diaspora, religion, and other things constant. So that would be a good chance of that. You're ready to submit that paper soon. Analysis.
Does the government fund a lot of the nonprofits or NGOs in India? So I saw the government portion there at the end, and in the US, we think about our healthcare system, hospitals, Medicare, Medicaid, that's a big share of the funding of these organizations.
Yeah, so unlike US, the sector is not that corporatized in India. So the hospitals are either totally for profit or totally public. There's not that much in between. So nonprofit is not used as a vehicle to run as a nonprofit, right? So this funding is mostly for social welfare program. And in India, the social welfare program have a strong history. So the government, it's in the government interest to work with civil society to provide social welfare programs like job training, basic education, food for food, things like that. So the welfare programs are mostly what the focus of the government is, and the nonprofit pitching on that. But there's not that much corporate, like the sector is not that corporatized as it's in the US. Like still the do-gooder is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
This might have been explained somewhere that I missed, but why is the 2017 to 2018, why is there a spike in government funding? Does it just vary that much, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So 2016 is where the political election happens, and 2017 is where the new government is. And one of the first promises of the government was to streamline a lot of the welfare programs. So what was happening earlier was the welfare program, say, if I want, one of the programs is say, if I have household income of $1,000 a year, then you get like a stove from the government. That stuff was happening more from the administrative side of things. But the government said, rather than giving you a stove, I'll just directly transfer the cash and you buy the stove from the market. So what that did was it ended up increasing the trust in the government, and the tax revenue increased quite a bit. And they also pipelined the tax revenue, so the people give the taxes and people are feeling where the money is going. And hence, there was a major chunk of this funding used by the government to give it to the civil society for people to do the welfare, which would have been done by the state. And 2017 is also the government is getting richer because they're able to kill the corruption and the corporation that the system. Right. So just like if the state needs to be powerful, the state needs money to be powerful, right? Money helps to buy military, not buy, but revamp it, have law enforcement and stuff like that. So how do I make the state stronger is by increasing the income, but I also want to see how the welfare state to give the money back to the society, but it's going to its that makes sense.
Thanks so much for this presentation. Very, very interesting, and talking more about it certainly later. And I think the argument that you put forth is pretty interesting and persuasive. I had two questions. One is trying to kind of understand the relationship between, or the distinction between civil society and liberal democracy, as you sort of discussed them here, and going back to something that you sort of briefly touched on, focused on motivations for giving. And I wanted to sort of hear more about kind of that potential work, particularly as it relates to maybe government using the motivations of people to further sort of undermine civil society in the ways that you were sort of describing.
Right, yeah. So let me go to the democracy question first. I want to see it from the ground up, not ground, ground down rather than ground, right? Democracy seems big ideas for people from, say India, 75 years so to me, I see democracy as I'm able to get electricity in my house. I'm able to have roads to my house. I do. So either you're able to provide, like the China model, right? Either you deliver service through being efficient. So reducing poverty, I'm having electricity and I'm having all that stuff, right? So I'm seeing a change in my life. I don't care who's in the power, right? Or so that's one way. The other way is that I control the narrative, right? And I control the narrative. First of all, I need money to control the narrative. So I have to buy TV space and all that stuff. And I need to have money to give to the people to be kind of really work the popularism side of things, right? The other is that I try to take the actors which are speaking this out. Right? I know I'm not that efficient to provide the delivery of this. Like India, still 34% people do not have electricity. Connection to roads are just happening. So, there's a vast service delivery, which I will never be able to manage from what China has done. I just try to control the space as much as possible. And easier for me to control the space is because everybody needs money. You just cannot upgrade it. And foreign funding is a target because it's accountable. I cannot give a cash and just give it, right? I have to transfer that money. Money will be entered somewhere and I can control it, but it sends a signal that I'm going to watch you. If that kind of right. So, but the motivation part of things is also super interesting because it's really because I think we think of humans as like one or so, right? But it's very complicated, right? For instance, identity giving is very, very important. There are people who are voting based on their own identity, despite they have got benefits, right? So what are the ways in which money is going and to what causes is really an important understanding to see that is identity playing a role or the causes, right? And then from a national level, right, from a country level, like this is the individual donor level, which I have not got to, but like I'm looking at the country of analysis here. So would there be more money given to a country because there's more diaspora, or will there be more money coming because there's more better trade relationship with that country, right? So I want to win the political favor, so I give money through an FCRA to the choice of the government. And now, so they're like, Benin was an example which had huge up example of money going into India, right? It had a trading relationship with India. So is Russia. There's a major donation switch from Russian weapon company comes to India of the choice of the government, not the choice of the government, because I have a trading relationship. But I want to empirically see, is that true, or is it that the people that try to get the donation? Or the values? right? Liberal values are driving liberal agendas, or liberal values are giving money to non-liberal. Right, because at the end of the day, I do need that money. I do need the weapon contract. I do need opening of Indian market, because I do not want to really upset the government. Because that will affect my operations. So there's money driving factor of the value.
Thank you for your presentation. You made a very compelling case in terms of democratic backsliding and the relationship with civil society organizations. So my question is there a parallel decline with increasing administrative burden and a parallel decline in number of NGOs? Like, is it a barrier to entry into the space, like for NGOs? So, or is it a control mechanism, or just because reduction in the number of civil society organizations is probably a bigger impact than just controlling?
Yeah.
And is this, is it your research is amenable for a comparative study for increased administrative burden in developed countries, developing countries, and democratic life? And last question, from a legal standpoint, when governments are increasing administrative burden, is there loopholes that can favor government-friendly NGOs? Because in Turkey, one arm of the existing political regime is civil society organizations acting under the guise of civil society organizations, but actually they're arm of the existing political regime, and they're funded, through government and through philanthropic efforts, and they're working for the regime basically. And so I'm curious about, is it a way to study their loopholes that, when these administrative burdens are applied selectively?
Yes, so I'll answer that third point. Absolutely. Yes. So what I've seen is there's a far more lesser compliance if you're Hindu, like your yoga center. Your Hindu yoga center. Now, yoga could be secular, right? But if you're a Hindu-based yoga center and there's a Hindu Nationalist Party, you have lesser compliance. You will still no problem getting the money, even if you do not update your status on the website. But if you are Greenpeace or you are a little bit more critical of the government, you have to be really on top of it. Otherwise, they're like really like it's like it feels palpable especially in the minds of the people there. So there is absolutely selective application, right? But it's also the balance and checks are gone, right? Like government is raising money for themselves, government is also giving licenses, government would also have a own political agenda, and now I'm just too much control there. So that would absolutely happen. Like it's bound to happen, right? Yes, there is a lot of selection of biases, and also it's a signal to certain organizations that you can operate freely and you cannot operate freely. As long as you're talking what the government wants you to talk, India is shining, go to Taj Mahal and you're nonprofit doing that, no problem. But you suddenly start talking about environment and pollution and all that stuff, that's a major problem. No, you cannot do it. And so it's done at the top level, but also when the nonprofits, and it's a reduction barrier to entry. There are a number of nonprofits who are nonprofits who do not want to take any foreign donations. License have been decreasing because they just don't want to have the headache to do it, or do not have the space to do it, right? And once you increase the administrative burden, you need to have the capacity to do it, right? You need to have legal team in place. You need to still do so. It helps a larger organization and reduces the small player out of the market.
My understanding is enforcement is selective, not the the regulations. Regulations that there is no loopholes. I mean, I shouldn't say there is no loopholes. There's always some loophole, but enforcement can always be selective.
Yes, and it is the case.
Go ahead, Aaron had a question for you. Why? I have so many questions. So
Redo it again.
okay, so I will try to limit this to two, but one thing I'm interested in is this data set, which I think before when you were presenting it, it was clear that you had the name and the address of the individual or the institutional donor who's making the contribution,
Right.
but it sounds like you also have that with exactly who it's supposed to be going to.
Yeah, so I have the name from where it's originating to the organization where the money is going.
Okay.
So I know where they are and where they are.
So one question I have is just, and then you mentioned looking at, maybe some characteristics of the donor and then the values of the
Yeah.
recipient. And I'm wondering, how are you, determining the values of the recipient? Like, what is that based on?
So I'm not looking at the donor, but I'm looking at the country level. So democracy index in those countries,
Okay.
right? So what is a religious freedom index, things like that. So like, what are the values they are standing for?
Okay.
So US, a bunch of donors from the US give money to multiple organizations in India. Is there an overlap to those organizations, which as a country is going money to? If that makes sense, right?
So you're looking at, like, if the US and Great Britain, for example, give to the same organizations, like the overlap between those countries are, like, we would assume US and UK have some more shared values.
Right,
So we should be giving to some of the same organizations.
exactly.
Okay. Like, my mind is going.
And
to, like,
also there is a very
Data
strong
mining.
predictor of trade. What's the trade relationship of those countries with India by the GDP?
Okay. We should talk more about the data mining part of that. But the other question I had is the administrative burden piece. It seems like there is, because there's so much, as Ezra was kind of pointing to, that is not explicit, but is understood by people and organizations who are operating in India. And it just seems like it begs for like a qualitative approach as well, because it's hard to capture that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering, what's your plan, what's your research design to dig into this idea of administrative burden? Because you've been focused more conceptually here.
Yeah. And I mean, so what I want to do is actually do the interviews with the organizations who have successfully got the license and also who have not got the license, and kind of really go through like what was the process like. So and that's what I want to do. My fear is if I start talking to them, then I probably will have shut research down. Because so I want to get the stuff which easy, like in sense like this donor data and other stuff out, and then I really get to like what is the qualitative responses about this whole experience, right? And it's very less people are interested in talk. I mean, you've got to spend time and, it's not that I do a Zoom call and like everybody. Yeah, this is like you build relationship, build trust, build that this data set will be used, all the protocols will be. So, but yes, so to that part of things, I do want to see like what is the qualitative part of like what is it to get the license, the experience of it, and that will touch upon several administrative, other kind of pursuits from that. I think I could like do a survey essentially to ask how much time they spend on, qualitatively on like what is a 100%, how much time are you spending on legal compliance, how much time are you spending on actually doing your job, how much time are you actually, so I could do that and and kind of do a survey of that sorts and kind of get an understanding of how much commitment of time they're doing to administrative cost, see that as one of the ways to do it. But I think the true nature would be to do more qualitative work there. But they could maybe survey, but it's just so difficult to get a representative survey of the story. You have to really form the relationship that people feel safe. And I also want them to have safety, like I want to give them a guarantee.
Do you feel that you can do that?
I don't know. I think it's harder. It's getting harder. Yeah, it's getting harder because we can talk offline about it, but it's getting harder.
Some other questions, but go ahead, Erin. Are we out of time or?
We're close. How about the last question?
You know what, I get to meet with Abhishek later on our own, so I'll take mine offline.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. One last, okay.
I know that Modi has been criticized in the past for like intervention in different food policies, like regulation of eggs or travel of beef across borders. That then falls into the social welfare of the government providing funds for, X programs. Do you see that? I don't know if this is something you looked into, like the differences of over states, whether it's more of a it like, if it's a part of the production of those states, or if it's like more of like a Hindu nationalist agenda for such a pervasive. Like social, I mean, like, you know, food is obviously a big part of everything that they do.
Yeah.
But trying to think of like what NGOs maybe lost their funding because they help provide like food assistance, but not an obligation to a, you know, more like a Hindu agenda.
Yeah.
Or I think that just would be really interesting. I don't know if it's like a question of you.
No, I think it is, you know, I think like, there is this strange toxicity. In the way of operation, and I think it has come down to the level of the legal conversations in which you start to talk to someone and see their name, and if it's not a Hindu name, then you may talk to them differently than you do. So, I mean, beef is made, right? Like people have been lynched to that, you know, numerous, right? So with the allegation that they may be something for essentially chicken, but the thing that they may have been cows, which essentially was meant to be food, and it was only source of protein. The southern states have so like Kerala, right? Kerala beef was legal, you can still eat it. Some of the restaurants will have it on the menu, but you can ask and you can get it. Bombay, where I started, I had to do in India, and was fairly available, but you can't even name it. Like it just people like if I ask them, I mean, they will think that I am probably CIA, and I'll kill them, right? Like that's the level of fear. But the southern states are not Hindu belt, and they are not BJP run still, so there is some degree of resistance there. And just final point, within the beef, there's also a caste element. Like the Brahmins can get by anything. So if you're a Hindu Brahmin, which is top of the pyramid, if you're from South, you can eat beef and nobody gonna say anything. But if you're a Dalit, which is bottom, and you are a Muslim, you know, just even by talking, you do in trouble as well. So your identity has to align with your future, for sure.
All right, well, this was a really interesting, really informative talk, really thank you for coming. So we do one last round of applause. The doctoral students can stick around for like 10 minutes, but you guys have class at. Okay, so yeah, so if you want us, don't mind, the doctoral students, talking with them for a few minutes. That would be awesome.
If anyone would like to grab any of the extra food, it's back there. Just sign off your name to grab it. Thank you. Yeah.